What is the ego in spirituality? Sophia Persephone here. Today I'm going to explain all about the ego and why it's a really important part of your overall system. So, what is the ego in spirituality? So ego today, the word, is often used to mean proud or arrogant, but there's a much deeper spiritual meaning. And in fact, the ego is one of the 4 compartments of the mind that are contained in the human avatar. It's basically the repository of beliefs that we start to collect about ourselves from the moment that we're born into a human body. So when we're very young, it collects beliefs like I'm human, I'm a girl, my name is Sophia, basic information about their state of being, your state of being. But as we get older, it could include things like I'm good at maths, or I don't like garlic, or more harmfully, it could be I always fail, I'm stupid, I'm ugly. These are examples of the kinds of beliefs that our ego collects about us. So the question is, why do we have an ego if it has the capacity to contain these beliefs about us? And it's actually there for a really good reason. It's there to help keep ourselves together when we're born into a human life. Because what we have to remember is, in the higher dimensions, we don't have these boundaries between ourselves as we do down here. It's kind of a soul soup. We experience ourselves as part of a collective, and there's no barrier between all of our thoughts and all of our experiences. So when we're born into a human body, it's a very disorienting experience for a young soul because it's cut off from all of this shared experience that it's used to in the higher dimensions. What it needs is a way to define itself, otherwise it could easily disintegrate. So when we're talking about the ego in spirituality, that's what it does. It preserves us as a whole being when we're incarnated in a human body. It's looking after us. So Sophia, my higher self, she refers to the ego in fact as the id or the ID, and that in fact is the definition that Sigmund Freud used for this part of the mind. Confusingly, what he called the ego is actually the conscious mind or the soul, but he did get it right with the id, and it's very telling. It's your ID, it's your identity, or at least it's your human identity in this lifetime. Now, when we're asking ourselves, what is the ego in spirituality, we tend to think of the ego as a bad thing which needs to be got rid of. And that is because during a spiritual awakening, we're reclaiming our true soul nature. We have that connection to other people and to the universe that we enjoy in the higher dimensions, albeit in a more limited form. So we don't need the ego in the same way because we have an awareness of ourselves as a soulful being. And in fact, after our spiritual awakening, the ego can hold us back quite a lot because of these self-limiting beliefs that it's collected. And of course, in soul world, there's no limits. But in its role as protector, the ego is trying to prevent ourselves from damaging ourselves, and it wants to remove us from harmful situations. And that includes, from the ego's perspectives, situations where we might fail, because human society as it is today doesn't tolerate failure very well. And so that's why the ego collects these beliefs like I'm no good at such and such, or she'd never go out with me, for example. But as souls, we know there's no such thing as failure. There's just learning. So when we start to reclaim our true soul nature, there develops a tension between ego and soul, or unconscious mind and conscious mind. The soul wants to go for it, the ego doesn't. So during spiritual awakening, we have to shed our ego to be able to fulfill our potential in this lifetime. And that's something that's also referred to as ego death. You may have heard the term. But I really want to stress that just because we need to move away from this egocentric modality, it doesn't mean that the ego is bad in and of itself. In fact, it is a valuable part of our system, and it has performed great service for us from the time that we were born. So it should be respected, it should be honoured, just as the body should. And also, it's impossible to shed our ego entirely. We retain at least 5%, even after we've completed our awakening journey. And the reason for that is the ego is what makes us unique. In the big soul soup of Soul World, as we progress through our soul lessons, we become more and more similar. It's our journey back to the Supreme Being, or God, if you prefer to call her God. So ultimately, when we've completed all of our lessons, when we're at 100% completion, we will be exactly the same as the ultimate oversoul. This is the idea of going back to God that we have in the major religions. For example, the senior members of the Council of Light are practically identical. It can be very difficult to tell them apart. So the ego, spiritually, allows our spirit to retain its unique identity. And this is important because when we die, our soul returns to Soul World, but a version of our human avatar, you, me, as we are today in this lifetime, also continues into the higher dimensions. And that's how spirit is different to the soul. There's a version of every single human being who ever lived somewhere in the higher dimensions, and their unique fingerprint comes from their ego. That's how we can tell Mozart from Beethoven, for example. So during your spiritual awakening journey, you're going to need to negotiate with your ego, probably more than once, so that it agrees to let go. And it allows the soul to lead the overall system. And ultimately, it allows your higher self to lead the overall system once you're fully transcended and you've completed your awakening journey. Your ego may also try to block your manifestation efforts because it's scared of change and it's scared of you doing new and dangerous things to its mind. And it's also worried about what it means for its own role, which is why, personally, I don't like the term ego death because, to a degree, your ego needs to be cared for and nurtured and loved and understood. It's in a way, it's the child of your system. So for my own part, I regularly meet with my ego in meditation. She always presents to me as myself at around 6 years of age, 6 years old. And I reassure her that she's important and she's loved and that we won't do anything without her because she worries that she'll vanish completely. So I explain to her that that's impossible. So, what is the ego in spirituality? It's a vital part of your system which has loved and protected the whole for many years and tried to keep it safe, ready for the day when your soul, your conscious mind, was able to break through and take charge. So please be kind to your ego. Thank it for all it's done for you.